"Ma'am, you need to move your dog. He won't let anyone near the man." Emily Carter's hands trembled as she tightened her grip on Max's leash, her heart hammering in her chest. Her German shepherd, normally obedient and friendly, stood rigid, his stance protective as he remained glued to the side of an unconscious man on the sidewalk. The early afternoon sun beat down on the quiet suburban street, and a small crowd had gathered, murmuring among themselves. Max had never acted like this before. He was trained, disciplined, always attentive to her commands. But now, he wouldn't budge, wouldn't even acknowledge her soft reassurances as she tried to pull him away. His deep brown eyes were fixed on the stranger lying motionless on the ground, his ears alert, his body tense, as if guarding a lifelong friend. "I'm sorry, officer," Emily said, looking up at the uniformed man standing beside her. "I don't know why he's acting like this." The officer exhaled sharply, his radio crackling as an update came through. "EMS is 5 minutes out. Just keep him under control." Emily nodded, swallowing hard as she knelt beside Max. "Come on, buddy. Let's give them some space." She tugged the leash again, but Max barely acknowledged her. His body remained pressed against the unconscious man's side, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. A woman in the crowd whispered, "Do you think they know each other?" Emily shook her head, bewildered. She had never seen this man before. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt, his blonde hair disheveled, his skin slightly pale. He didn't look homeless, or like someone who had been on the streets. He could have been anyone. A passerby, a jogger, a neighbor. But Emily didn't recognize him. The ambulance's siren grew louder, and within moments 2 paramedics rushed onto the scene. As they approached, Max let out a low growl, his muscles flexing. Emily gasped and placed a hand on his back. "Max, no," she whispered. One of the paramedics, a young man with short brown hair, hesitated. "He's not going to let us help him, is he?" I don't know." Emily's voice wavered. "He's never done anything like this before." The second paramedic, a woman in her 40s, spoke gently. "Dogs have instincts. Maybe he's protecting him for a reason." Emily looked at Max, confusion swirling in her mind. What reason could he possibly have? The paramedic knelt and extended her hand slowly. "Hey there, big guy. You watching over him?" Her voice was warm, soothing. Max's ears twitched, and for a brief second, Emily thought he might let up. But instead he lowered his head, keeping his body firmly between the paramedics and the stranger. His growl wasn't aggressive, just firm. Protective. The paramedic turned to Emily. "You might have to coax him away. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem." Emily nodded and took a deep breath, steadying herself. She reached for Max's collar and ran her fingers through the thick fur on his neck. "Max, listen to me. They need to help him. You have to let them." The dog let out a small whine, his head shifting slightly toward Emily. His resistance wavered just enough that the paramedics took the opportunity to move in. One of them checked the man's pulse, while the other retrieved equipment from the ambulance. Max whined again, but finally allowed Emily to guide him a few feet back. He still refused to look away, his watchful eyes tracking every movement as they worked on the stranger. Emily ran a hand down his back. "Good boy," she whispered. The paramedic looked up. "His pulse is steady but weak. He might be dehydrated. Could be a medical condition." Emily's stomach twisted. She knew she should leave. Let them do their job. But something about the way Max had reacted made her hesitate. "Do you know him?" one of the bystanders asked. Emily shook her head. "No, but apparently Max does. The ambulance doors swung open, and the paramedics lifted the man onto a stretcher. Max let out another whimper, his body shifting forward before Emily tightened her grip on his leash. He didn't struggle against her hold, but his anxious gaze never left the man's still form. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Emily glanced at the officer still standing nearby. "Where are they taking him?" "St. Mary's Hospital," the officer replied. "You said your dogs never acted like this before?" "Never," she admitted. "I don't understand it." The officer studied her for a moment before nodding toward the ambulance. "You might want to check in on him." Emily frowned. "Why?" "Because I've seen a lot of things in this job," he said, "and I've learned to trust a dog's instincts when they're this strong." Emily looked down at Max, who was still staring at the ambulance as its doors shut, and the siren blared once again. Her stomach twisted as an unshakable feeling took root in her chest. Maybe she should go to the hospital. Maybe Max knew something she didn't. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a coincidence at all. She hesitated for only a second before making a decision. "Come on, Max." The dog perked up, his ears flicking forward as she turned toward her car. The officer stepped closer. "You heading over?" Emily nodded. "Yeah, I think I need to see this through." Max didn't need any encouragement. As soon as Emily opened the passenger door, he jumped in, still facing the ambulance as if he could somehow keep an eye on the man inside. Emily turned the key in the ignition, a strange mix of concern and curiosity swirling in her mind. She had a feeling this was only the beginning. Emily's heart pounded as she maneuvered her car onto the main road, following the ambulance as closely as she could without raising suspicion. Max sat rigid in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the flashing red and white lights ahead. His ears perked up at every siren wail, his entire body tense with anticipation. "What is it, boy?" Emily murmured, though she already knew she wouldn't get an answer. Max was behaving unlike anything she had ever seen before. He wasn't just concerned. He was determined. She had rescued him when he was just a pup, training him to be her companion, her protector. They had been through so much together, yet this reaction was something new. It was as if Max had a personal connection to the unconscious man. The thought sent a chill through her. At the next light, Emily caught her breath and glanced at her phone, navigating to the hospital's address to ensure she wouldn't lose track of the ambulance. The moment the light turned green, she pressed forward, keeping a careful eye on the traffic ahead. 15 minutes later, she pulled into the hospital parking lot, finding a spot near the emergency entrance. The ambulance had already arrived, and the paramedics were unloading the stretcher, wheeling the man inside. Emily watched as Max let out a small, desperate whimper. Okay, she whispered, unbuckling her seatbelt and stepping out. She moved around to open Max's door, but he leapt out before she had fully grasped the handle. He made a beeline toward the entrance, only stopping when Emily called his name firmly. She quickly clipped his leash, leading him toward the automatic doors. The cold hospital air greeted them as they stepped inside, and Emily approached the front desk. A nurse behind the counter looked up from her monitor. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice polite but distracted. Emily hesitated. She had no real reason to be here, other than the fact that her dog refused to leave the man's side. How could she explain that? "The man who just came in," she finally said. "The one brought in by ambulance. Do you know his condition?" The nurse blinked at her, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't release that information unless you're family." Emily bit her lip. "Right, of course." Before she could turn away, Max whined again, pulling on the leash toward the hallway where the paramedics had gone. The nurse's eyes flicked down to him. "That's a very protective dog you have there." "You have no idea." The nurse glanced at Max once more before lowering her voice slightly. "Look, I can't give you details, but I can tell you that he's stable for now. He's still unconscious, though." Emily exhaled, her grip on the leash loosening slightly. "Thank you." The nurse gave her a small nod, then returned to her work. Emily turned toward the waiting area, guiding Max to an empty row of chairs. She sat down, but Max remained standing, still staring down the hall. For a long while, they just waited. Emily's mind raced with thoughts. Who was this man? Why had Max reacted so strongly? What if she never got any answers? Minutes turned into an hour, and then another. The waiting room buzzed with people coming and going. Nurses calling names, the occasional sound of a hospital cart rolling by. And then, finally, something happened. A doctor emerged from the hallway, speaking quietly to a nurse beside him. He was tall, his expression neutral, but Emily saw the glance he cast toward her and Max before he continued toward the front desk. Max's ears perked up, and before Emily could stop him, he pulled hard on the leash, surging toward the doctor. She nearly stumbled but managed to keep her footing as Max let out a sharp bark. The doctor turned, surprised. "Whoa," he said, raising a hand. "Easy there." Emily pulled Max back. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "He's just—" But Max wasn't having it. His eyes locked on the doctor, and his body language wasn't aggressive, but insistent. The doctor frowned slightly and looked at Emily. "Are you the woman from the scene?" "Yes," she said, still catching her breath. I was there when he collapsed." The doctor studied her for a moment before nodding. "He's still unconscious, but his vitals are stabilizing. We're running tests." Emily nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I don't know how to explain this, but my dog, he wouldn't leave his side. I've never seen him act this way before." The doctor glanced at Max, who stood firmly beside Emily, still watching him with keen eyes. "Animals are strange that way," the doctor said thoughtfully. "Sometimes they pick up on things we can't. Maybe there's a reason he's so attached." Emily frowned. "But how could he know him? I don't recognize him. I don't think I've ever seen him before." The doctor nodded, considering her words. "Sometimes the mind remembers things that the eyes don't." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at Max, then back toward the hallway where the unconscious man lay. She had a feeling that whatever had brought them here wasn't over yet. Just as she was about to sit back down, a woman rushed through the hospital doors. She was in her late 30s, her blonde hair tied back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes scanned the room frantically. She spotted the nurse at the desk and hurried over. "I'm looking for my brother. He was brought in by ambulance not too long ago. His name is Ryan Evans." Emily stiffened. Ryan Evans. The name meant nothing to her, but Max's ears twitched. His attention snapped toward the woman as if he recognized her. The nurse nodded, glancing at her monitor. "He's stable, still unconscious. You can wait here until a doctor comes to speak with you." The woman let out a shaky breath and collapsed into a chair, her hands clutching her purse. Max let out another low whimper, and Emily exchanged a look with him. Something was connecting them to this man. And now, Emily had a name. Ryan Evans. She knew she had to find out why Max wouldn't leave his side. Emily sat quietly in the waiting room, stealing glances at the woman who had just arrived, Ryan Evans's sister. She seemed exhausted, her shoulders hunched, fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. Max was still restless, shifting his weight, ears flicking every time someone walked by. She couldn't ignore the way he had reacted to this man, and now he seemed just as intrigued by the woman. Emily debated whether she should say something. Maybe she could ask how long Ryan had been in town, see if there was any way Max could have known him. But before she could, the woman let out a heavy sigh and rubbed her temples. Emily finally spoke. "Excuse me. I don't mean to intrude, but I was there when your brother collapsed." The woman turned her tired eyes toward Emily, surprise flickering across her face. "You were?" Emily nodded. "Yes. I called 911. My dog—" She hesitated, wondering how to phrase it without sounding absurd. "My dog wouldn't leave his side." The woman blinked, glancing down at Max. "Really?" Emily offered a small smile. "Yeah. I've never seen him act like that before. It was almost like he knew him." A strange expression crossed the woman's face, something between curiosity and deep thought. "That's interesting." Emily tilted her head slightly. "You don't happen to recognize my dog, do you?" Ryan's sister shook her head slowly. "No, I don't think so." Max let out a soft whine, shifting closer toward the woman. She reached out hesitantly, letting her fingers graze his fur. He didn't pull away. The waiting room was silent for a moment before the woman sighed. "I'm Claire, by the way." "Emily." She gave a small nod. "Do you know if your brother has ever been around dogs?" Claire's lips pressed together. "Not that I can think of. At least not recently. But—" She hesitated. "When we were kids, we had a German Shepherd." Emily's eyebrows lifted. "Really?" Claire nodded. "His name was Duke. Ryan loved him. They were inseparable, did everything together." She let out a soft chuckle, but it was tinged with sadness. "Duke passed away when Ryan was 13. He took it really hard." Emily glanced at Max, who was now resting his chin on Claire's knee, looking up at her as if listening. A thought flickered in her mind, something she wasn't sure she could say aloud without sounding foolish. But the way Max had reacted, the way he had refused to leave Ryan's side, could there be some kind of connection? "Maybe he reminded Ryan of Duke," Emily offered carefully. Claire gave her a small, tired smile. "Maybe. That would make sense." Before Emily could say more, a doctor appeared in the hallway. "Claire Evans?" Claire shot up from her chair. "Yes?" The doctor nodded. "Your brother is awake." Emily could feel the tension in Claire's body shift, a mixture of relief and worry washing over her. "Can I see him?" "Yes, but just for a few minutes. He's still weak." Claire glanced down at Max, then back at Emily. "Would you mind waiting here?" Emily smiled. Of course. She watched as Claire hurried down the hall, disappearing through the doors. Max's tail wagged slightly, his body relaxing just a bit. Something told Emily that this wasn't just a coincidence. She had no idea what it meant yet, but she knew one thing. Max had led her here for a reason. Minutes passed, and Emily kept glancing toward the hallway, half expecting Claire to return with some revelation. But time stretched on. Max had settled down beside her chair, still alert, but calmer now. Emily reached down to scratch his ears, whispering, "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" The door to the emergency room swung open again, and Claire walked out, her face pale but thoughtful. She moved toward Emily and sat down beside her, exhaling deeply. "He asked about a dog," she said quietly. Emily's breath hitched. "He did?" Claire nodded, her fingers pressing into the sides of her temple as if trying to make sense of it all. When he woke up, he was confused, obviously. But one of the first things he said was, "Where's Duke?" Emily's pulse quickened. "That's strange." "I know," Claire murmured. "Duke died years ago, but Ryan kept saying he saw him." Emily swallowed hard, glancing at Max. The dog lifted his head slightly as if he, too, were trying to understand. Could it be? Could Ryan have mistaken Max for Duke in those blurry moments between consciousness and unconsciousness? Or was there something else? "I think you should bring Max in," Claire said after a moment of silence. Emily hesitated. "You think that's a good idea?" Claire gave a small nod. "If he keeps asking about Duke, maybe seeing Max will help. Maybe it'll bring him some clarity." Emily looked down at Max, her heart racing. She had never been one to believe in supernatural connections, but this situation felt bigger than simple coincidence. Taking a deep breath, she stood, tightening Max's leash. "All right, let's do it." Claire led the way through the hallway, pausing at the doorway of a small hospital room. Inside, Ryan was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but conscious. His eyes flickered toward them as they entered, and for a moment, he simply stared. Max took a few hesitant steps forward, his tail wagging slightly, but he remained quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Ryan's expression shifted. His gaze locked on the dog. A soft breath escaped his lips. "Duke?" Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. "No," she said gently. "This is Max." Ryan's brows furrowed. "Max?" Emily nodded. He wouldn't leave your side when you collapsed. I've never seen him act like that before." Ryan swallowed, glancing between them. "It felt so real," he murmured. "Like Duke was there. Like he was watching over me." Claire stepped closer, resting a hand on her brother's arm. Maybe, in a way, he was. Ryan's tired eyes flickered toward Max again, and for the first time since waking up, he smiled. A small, weary, but genuine smile. Max took another step forward, resting his head against Ryan's hand. Ryan exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing through the dog's fur. "Thank you," he whispered, though Emily wasn't sure if he was speaking to her, to Max, or to something else entirely. Emily watched as Max leaned further into Ryan's touch, his body still and calm. It was as if he knew this was a moment of understanding, a bridge connecting past and present. Claire sat on the edge of her brother's hospital bed, her eyes flicking between Ryan and Max, her features softening in quiet disbelief. Ryan's fingers traced over Max's fur, and his brows furrowed. This is crazy," he muttered, shaking his head slightly. "I swear, for a moment, I felt Duke again, like he was there." Emily hesitated before speaking. "I don't think it's crazy," she said softly. "I think animals have a way of sensing things we don't. And Max, he wouldn't leave your side. That's never happened before." Ryan let out a shaky breath. "Duke was always watching out for me," he said, his voice distant. "I used to think about him all the time when I was a kid. But as I got older, I tried to let go." He glanced down at Max again. "But I swear, I felt him. Just now. When I was out cold, I had this dream. If it even was a dream, I was somewhere peaceful, and Duke was there, just sitting next to me. He didn't bark or move, just watched me, and when I woke up, I felt like he was still there." Emily and Claire exchanged a glance. Neither spoke for a moment, letting Ryan's words settle in the quiet hospital room. "Maybe he never left," Claire finally said, her voice hushed. Maybe he's been watching over you this whole time. Ryan's lips curved into a small smile. Maybe. Max let out a small huff, as if satisfied with the reunion. His tail thumped against the floor, and Emily felt a sense of warmth spread through her chest. "Do you remember what happened before you collapsed?" Emily asked gently, not wanting to overwhelm him. Ryan sighed, shifting slightly against the pillow. "Not really. I was walking down the street, thinking about a lot of things. Work's been stressful, and I guess I hadn't been taking care of myself. Then, out of nowhere, I started feeling dizzy. My chest got tight, and the next thing I knew, everything went dark." He exhaled, his fingers still absent-mindedly stroking Max's fur. "It wasn't a heart attack, at least that's what the doctor said. Probably just exhaustion or dehydration." Claire frowned. "Ryan, you push yourself too hard." Ryan offered a small chuckle. "So I've been told." Emily leaned back in her chair, processing everything. Max's reaction, Ryan's dream, the connection to Duke. It all felt too significant to ignore. She had always believed that animals had a unique sense of loyalty, but this was something beyond that. Ryan's gaze lifted to Emily. "Thank you, for helping me, and for bringing Max here." She smiled. "It was really Max who did everything. I just followed his lead." Ryan nodded slowly, his eyes still studying Max as though trying to understand some unspoken truth. The doctor returned a few minutes later, checking Ryan's vitals and giving him an update on his condition. "You're lucky," he said. "A little more stress, and it could have been worse." Ryan exhaled. "Yeah, I'm getting that impression." Claire squeezed his hand. "Maybe this is a wake-up call." Ryan let out a breathy laugh. "Maybe." He looked back down at Max, his expression thoughtful. "It's funny. When Duke was alive, he always had this way of pulling me out of my worst days. He'd sense when I was down, nudge my arm, do something goofy to make me laugh." He scratched behind Max's ears. "Feels like he's still looking out for me." Emily felt her throat tighten. "Maybe he is," she said softly. For the next hour, they sat together, talking in quiet voices. Ryan asked more about Max, and Emily told him about the day she rescued him as a puppy. She watched as Ryan listened intently, his eyes flickering between her and the dog that still hadn't left his side. Eventually, the doctor returned with some final notes. "You'll need rest, but you're free to go home in the morning," he said. Claire smiled. "That's good news." Ryan nodded, glancing at Max. "Maybe I should get a dog again." Claire grinned. "I think that's a great idea." Emily laughed. "I think Max would approve." Ryan chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "It really does feel like Duke brought me back here." Max wagged his tail, and Emily knew, deep in her heart, that whatever connection had been made that day wasn't a coincidence. Some bonds simply never faded, no matter how much time had passed. Emily woke up the next morning with the sensation that something had shifted. The events of the previous day still played in her mind, and she found herself watching Max as he lay curled up at the foot of the bed. He had been particularly quiet since they returned home, as if he were still processing everything in his own way. After making coffee, she took a seat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone. There was a text from Claire. "Claire, thank you again for everything. Ryan is being discharged today. He keeps talking about Max. I think he really wants to see him again." Emily smiled at the message. Ryan's connection with Max was undeniable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something greater was at play. She quickly typed a response. "Emily, of course, let me know when you're ready, and Max and I will meet you." Not long after, Claire responded with a time and place. Ryan's apartment. Emily glanced at Max. Looks like we're going on another trip, buddy. Max lifted his head slightly, his tail tapping against the floor before he stretched and stood up. He was ready. By early afternoon, Emily pulled up in front of Ryan's building. It was a modest, well-kept apartment complex, the kind of place where everyone probably knew their neighbors. She spotted Claire waiting outside and waved as she stepped out of the car. Max hopped down eagerly, sniffing the air before pulling toward Claire. "He's been looking forward to this," Claire said, scratching Max behind the ears. "Ryan hasn't stopped talking about him." Emily smiled. "Well, Max has been acting like he knew this was coming." Claire led the way inside, up the stairs to the second floor, and stopped at a door with the number 204. She knocked gently. A moment later, the door opened, and Ryan stood there, looking much better than he had in the hospital. He was still a little pale, but his eyes were bright. The moment he saw Max, his face broke into a grin. "There he is." Max's tail wagged furiously as he stepped forward, pressing his head against Ryan's leg. Ryan knelt, running his hands through Max's fur with a look of quiet wonder. "It's really weird," he admitted. "Seeing him like this. It's like—" He trailed off, shaking his head slightly. "Like Duke never really left." Emily and Claire exchanged a glance, but said nothing. It was Ryan's moment to figure things out for himself. After a few minutes, Ryan stood and motioned for them to come inside. The apartment was simple but cozy. A couch, a small dining table, bookshelves lined with a mix of novels and old family pictures. Emily noted a framed photo on the wall of a much younger Ryan with a German shepherd by his side. Ryan caught her looking. "That's Duke," he said with a nostalgic smile. "He was my best friend." Emily hesitated before saying, "Maybe he still is." Ryan's expression turned thoughtful, but he didn't brush the idea away. Instead, he turned back to Max, crouching to his level. "Hey, buddy, want to go for a walk?" Max's ears perked up, and his tail thumped against the floor. That was all the answer they needed. The four of them set off down the quiet street, the sun filtering through the trees in a golden haze. Ryan walked beside Max, his movements still a little slow, but there was an ease to him now that hadn't been there before. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't carrying so much weight. They reached a park nearby, and Ryan led them to a bench. "This was where Duke and I used to come all the time," he said. "We'd sit here after long walks. Sometimes he'd just lay his head in my lap, like he knew I needed him." Max stepped closer, nudging Ryan's hand before settling beside him. Ryan let out a short laugh. "Just like that," he murmured. Emily sat beside them, while Claire stood nearby, watching the scene unfold with quiet admiration. "Do you think you'll get another dog?" Emily asked. Ryan exhaled, looking at Max. "I don't know. I thought about it, but part of me wondered if I was just chasing something I'd never get back. But now, seeing Max, feeling the way he's been around me, I don't know. Maybe it's time." Emily smiled. "I think you'd be a great dog owner again." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, nodding. "Yeah, maybe." Claire took a seat on the bench next to them. "It's funny," she said. "Growing up, I remember Duke always being this guardian for Ryan. He wasn't just a pet. He was part of the family. It's crazy how Max showed up in his life at this exact moment." Emily glanced down at Max. "It is. He's always been a good judge of character, but this is something else." Ryan rested a hand on Max's back. "I don't know what I believe in," he admitted. "But maybe Just maybe Duke's been watching out for me this whole time. And maybe Max is here to make sure I don't forget that. Emily's heart swelled at the thought. Some connections never truly faded, and maybe, just maybe, Ryan had been given a small reminder of that today. They spent another hour at the park, talking and reminiscing. Ryan told stories about Duke, moments Emily and Claire had never heard before. As the sun began to set, they finally stood, making their way back to Ryan's apartment. Before they left, Ryan turned to Emily. "Would you two come back sometime?" Emily smiled. "Of course." Max wagged his tail, looking up at Ryan with those knowing eyes. And for the first time in a long while, Ryan didn't feel alone. Emily didn't realize how much Max's presence had changed things until the following week. Every time she looked at him, she saw how deeply he had connected with Ryan, how something beyond explanation had drawn them together. It made her wonder if fate had orchestrated all of it. Max finding Ryan at just the right moment, the way Duke's memory had surfaced so strongly. Ryan had sent her a message 2 days after their last visit, asking if she and Max would like to meet up again. He sounded more upbeat, lighter, like something inside him had begun to heal. And so here they were, making their way back to Ryan's apartment on a bright Saturday afternoon. Max was alert the moment they stepped out of the car, his tail wagging in anticipation as they walked up to the building. Claire opened the door for them before they had a chance to knock. "He's excited," she said with a grin, stepping aside so they could enter. Ryan was sitting on the couch, his feet propped up on the coffee table, but the moment he saw Max, he perked up. "Hey, buddy," he called, patting his lap. Max didn't hesitate, jumping up beside him and pressing his nose against Ryan's hand. Emily took a seat in one of the chairs across the room, watching the way Ryan automatically started petting Max, his fingers running through his fur as if it were second nature. "I can't believe how much better you look," she said. "It's like you're a different person." Ryan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I feel different. I don't know what it is, but ever since I woke up in that hospital bed, I've had this overwhelming feeling that something has shifted." He paused, glancing down at Max. "And I think a lot of that has to do with him." Emily smiled. "He has that effect on people." Claire sat down beside Ryan and nodded. "He's brought something back into your life that I think you were missing." Ryan nodded slowly. "You know, after Duke passed, I swore I wouldn't get another dog. It just felt wrong, like I was replacing him. But after everything that's happened, I don't feel that way anymore." Emily watched as Max nudged Ryan's hand again, urging him to keep petting. It was as if the dog knew exactly what Ryan needed, just like Duke had all those years ago. "Maybe it's time," Ryan said finally. "Maybe I should get a dog." Claire clapped her hands together. "That's what I've been saying, and I know a few shelters that have some really great dogs looking for homes." Ryan exhaled, rubbing his face before looking over at Emily. "You've worked with rescues before, right?" She nodded. "I volunteer sometimes. If you're serious about getting a dog, I can help." Ryan let out a small laugh. "I think I am." Claire beamed. "This is the best news ever. You won't regret it." Max let out a soft bark, almost as if he were agreeing. They spent the next hour looking through local shelter websites, scrolling through photos of dogs in need of homes. Ryan seemed drawn to a particular German Shepherd mix named Toby, who had been rescued after being abandoned. "He looks a little like Duke," Ryan mused. Emily smiled. "Maybe that's a sign." Ryan tapped the screen. "I think I need to meet him." Claire grabbed her car keys. "Let's go right now." Ryan hesitated. then looked down at Max. "What do you think, buddy? Should we go?" Max wagged his tail enthusiastically. Ryan laughed. "All right, let's do this." The drive to the shelter was filled with an air of excitement, though Ryan fidgeted slightly in his seat, as if nervous. Emily noticed and shot him a reassuring smile. "It's okay to be unsure. It's a big decision." Ryan nodded, exhaling deeply. "Yeah, I don't want to make a mistake. I want to be sure." Claire reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You'll know when you meet the right dog." When they arrived at the shelter, a volunteer greeted them warmly and led them inside. The moment they stepped into the kennel area, a chorus of barks filled the air. Ryan's gaze immediately searched for Toby, and when the volunteer led them toward his enclosure, Toby was already at the front, his eyes bright with curiosity. Max was the first to react, sniffing through the metal fencing, his tail wagging. Toby mirrored the motion, his tail thumping against the ground. Ryan knelt, hesitantly reaching his hand toward Toby. The dog sniffed him before licking his fingers, earning a soft chuckle from Ryan. "He's friendly." Emily grinned. "He likes you." The volunteer opened the kennel, and Toby stepped forward, immediately rubbing against Ryan's leg. Ryan hesitated, then slowly ran his fingers through Toby's fur. A strange sense of familiarity washed over him. "This feels right," he murmured. Claire beamed. "I think you just found your new best friend." Ryan looked up, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Yeah, I think I did." Emily watched the scene unfold, her heart full. Max stood beside Toby, as if giving his silent approval. It was as if the past had come full circle, leading Ryan exactly where he needed to be. Ryan turned to the volunteer. "What do I need to do to adopt him?" The volunteer smiled. "Let's get started on the paperwork." As they walked toward the office, Toby stayed close to Ryan, his eyes shining with trust. Max trotted beside them, almost as if he knew his job was done. Emily knew this wasn't just about getting a new dog. This was about healing, about moving forward while keeping the past close. And for Ryan, it was about realizing that love, once given, never truly fades. Emily watched as Ryan filled out the adoption paperwork, his fingers gripping the pen with a mix of excitement and nerves. Toby sat beside him, leaning against his leg, already making himself at home. Max lay nearby, his tail wagging lazily, as if content with the outcome. The shelter volunteer handed Ryan the final document to sign and smiled. "Congratulations, Toby is officially yours." Ryan let out a breath and grinned, running a hand through Toby's fur. "Feels unreal," he admitted. "But in a good way." Claire clapped her hands. "This is the best decision you've made in a long time." Emily nodded. "You two are going to be great together." As they stepped outside, the sun bathed them in warmth. Toby trotted beside Ryan, his energy infectious. Emily could already see the difference in Ryan. There was a newfound lightness to him, a purpose that hadn't been there before. "Ready to take him home?" she asked. Ryan exhaled. "Yeah, let's do this." The ride back to Ryan's apartment was filled with laughter as Toby eagerly explored the back seat, sticking his head out the window. Max watched him, his tail thumping against Emily's leg. When they arrived, Toby took his first steps into Ryan's home, sniffing every inch, tail wagging furiously. "Looks like he's claiming the place already," Claire observed with a chuckle. Ryan crouched next to Toby, scratching behind his ears. "This is your home now, buddy." Emily smiled, watching the bond already forming. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. Ryan met her gaze and nodded. Yeah, for the first time in a long while, I really think I am. Max barked, as if sealing the moment, and they all laughed. Toby playfully pounced toward Max, initiating a chase around the living room. Looks like they're going to be best friends, Claire said. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. I think so too. As the evening settled in, they sat together, watching the two dogs interact, knowing this was only the beginning of something truly special. A few days passed, and Ryan fell into a comfortable routine with Toby. Each morning, he woke up earlier than usual to take Toby for a long walk. The simple act of stepping outside, feeling the crisp morning air, and watching Toby's excitement as he explored the neighborhood filled Ryan with a sense of purpose. It had been years since he felt this way, like he had something to look forward to every day. One morning, Emily and Max joined them for a walk. Max and Toby trotted ahead, occasionally glancing back at their humans. Emily walked beside Ryan, sipping coffee from a thermos. So, how's life with a new dog? Ryan chuckled. It's different, but in the best way. I didn't realize how much I missed this. The companionship, the daily walks, just having someone there. Emily smiled. Dogs have a way of filling spaces we didn't even know were empty. Ryan nodded, glancing at Toby, who was now engaged in an enthusiastic game of tug-of-war with Max over a stick. I think he's adjusting faster than I am. That's a good thing. It means he's comfortable with you. They walked in silence for a few moments, enjoying the morning stillness. Then Ryan spoke again, his tone more serious. I was thinking about something. Emily raised an eyebrow. Oh? Duke was the best thing that ever happened to me as a kid. I think Toby is here at just the right time for me now, but I keep wondering, what if I hadn't run into Max that day? What if I hadn't woken up in that hospital? Would I have ever realized I needed this? Emily inhaled deeply. Fate has a funny way of working things out, doesn't it? Ryan glanced at her. Do you believe in fate? She thought for a moment. I don't know, but I believe that sometimes things happen exactly when they're supposed to. And maybe Max was meant to lead you to Toby. Ryan let that sink in as they continued their walk. When they returned to his apartment, Toby flopped onto the couch, exhausted but happy. Max lay beside him, the two of them already inseparable. He really is perfect for you, Emily said as she gathered her things to leave. You made the right choice. Ryan nodded. I think so too. And thanks, Emily, for everything. She smiled. Anytime. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and Toby settled into their new life together. The bond between them grew stronger each day. Ryan found himself looking forward to their walks, their play sessions, even just the quiet moments of sitting together at the end of a long day. One evening, as he sat on the couch, scratching behind Toby's ears, he glanced at a framed picture of Duke on the bookshelf. I think you'd like him, buddy, he murmured. You two would have been great together. Toby let out a soft sigh and rested his head on Ryan's lap. Max, sitting nearby, watched them quietly, as if understanding the moment. Claire visited often, always happy to see the change in her brother. You're different now, Ryan, she told him one night over dinner. Happier. It's good to see. Ryan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. I am. That night, as he lay in bed with Toby curled up at his feet, he realized something important. He wasn't just moving forward. He was healing. Ryan awoke to the sound of Toby stirring at the foot of his bed. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. Toby stretched lazily, his tail wagging slightly as he padded over to Ryan's side, nudging him with his nose. All right, Ryan murmured, rubbing his eyes before giving Toby a scratch behind his ears. Let's get moving. As they stepped outside, the crisp morning air filled Ryan's lungs, waking him up fully. Toby trotted ahead, ears perked, scanning the quiet street for any signs of movement. It had become their routine, early morning walks before the rest of the world stirred, and each day, Ryan felt a little more like himself. Halfway through their route, Ryan spotted Emily and Max coming from the opposite direction. Max barked in greeting, causing Toby's ears to perk up before he bounded forward to meet his friend. "Hey, stranger," Emily called as she approached. "I was wondering when we'd run into you." Ryan smirked. "You know me, I like to keep a low profile." Emily chuckled. "You're out at the same time every morning. Not exactly subtle." They continued their walk together, falling into an easy rhythm. The dogs ran ahead, playing and sniffing at patches of grass. Ryan glanced over at Emily. "You still think Max was meant to lead me to Toby?" Emily shrugged. "I don't think I ever doubted it." Ryan let the thought settle in his mind as they reached the park. Toby and Max took off in a flurry of paws and wagging tails, racing across the open field. "I feel like I should thank Max," Ryan mused, watching them. "Without him, I wouldn't have met Toby." Emily smiled. "You don't have to thank him. Just keep moving forward. That's what matters." They sat on a bench, letting the dogs play while they sipped their coffee. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't think I'd ever feel normal again, after everything." Emily turned to him. "But you do now?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I do." The morning passed in comfortable conversation, and by the time they returned home, Ryan felt lighter. Toby flopped onto his favorite spot on the couch, exhausted from the morning's adventures. Ryan sat beside him, running a hand over his fur. "You're part of this family now," he murmured, "and I think you were meant to be." Toby let out a content sigh, curling up next to him. Ryan glanced at the framed picture of Duke on the bookshelf and smiled. Somehow, everything had fallen into place. As the weeks went by, Ryan found himself adjusting to a new rhythm of life. He and Toby had grown inseparable, moving through their days like they had always been together. Mornings were filled with walks, afternoons with training sessions, and evenings with Toby resting his head on Ryan's lap while he read or watched TV. Emily and Max remained a steady presence, joining them for long walks or meeting up at the dog park on weekends. It was as if Max had passed on his responsibility of guiding Ryan to Toby, and now he was content to simply enjoy their friendship. One evening, as they sat outside a coffee shop after their walk, Emily took a sip of her tea and looked at Ryan thoughtfully. "So, what's next for you?" Ryan tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "You've settled into this new routine, and it's great. But do you feel like there's something more? Something you still want to do?" Ryan thought about it. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't just existing, he was living. But Emily had a point. Now that he had found his footing, what came next? "I've been thinking about volunteering," he admitted. "Maybe at a shelter or a rescue organization." Emily's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. You've got the patience and the experience, and who knows, maybe you'll end up helping someone else find their perfect match." Ryan smiled. "Yeah, maybe." A few days later, he reached out to a local rescue group and signed up to help with weekend adoption events. His first shift came quickly, and as he stood among the excited dogs and hopeful adopters, he couldn't help but think about how far he had come. As Ryan walked through the kennels, he noticed a nervous-looking young woman standing near one of the enclosures, wringing her hands. Inside the kennel was a timid, mixed-breed dog, cowering in the corner. "Hey there," Ryan said gently. "Thinking about adopting?" The woman hesitated. "I want to, but I'm not sure if I can handle it." Ryan glanced at the dog, then back at her. "It can be overwhelming at first, but if you take it one step at a time, it gets easier." She nodded, still unsure. "Did you ever feel like that? Like you weren't ready?" Ryan exhaled, remembering his own doubts. "Yeah, but I had help, and I found the right dog at the right time. Sometimes you don't realize how much you need them until they're already in your life." The woman's expression softened as she looked back at the dog. "Maybe I just need to take a chance." Ryan smiled. That's how all the best stories start. As he continued helping that day, he felt something settle inside him. This was where he was meant to be, helping others find the same companionship that had changed his life. Later that evening, as he sat on his couch with Toby curled up beside him, Ryan looked around his home, at the framed photos of Duke, at the chew toys scattered across the floor, at the peaceful expression on Toby's face. He had been lost for a long time, but now, he wasn't just moving forward, he was building something new, something meaningful. And as he ran his fingers through Toby's fur, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he had been led to exactly where he needed to be. Ryan felt a renewed sense of purpose in his role at the rescue organization. Every weekend, he found himself looking forward to working with the dogs, helping potential adopters find their perfect match, and seeing timid animals slowly learn to trust again. It reminded him so much of his journey with Toby, how hesitant he had been at first, how unsure, and yet now, he couldn't imagine life without him. One Saturday morning, he arrived early, sipping his coffee as he walked past the rows of kennels. The dogs barked their greetings, tails wagging as they recognized him. He stopped at a familiar kennel where a young shepherd mix named Cooper had been staying for the past few weeks. Cooper had been found abandoned, nervous and withdrawn, but Ryan had been working with him little by little, earning his trust. "Morning, buddy," Ryan said softly, crouching down near the kennel. Cooper lifted his head, sniffing the air, then slowly wagged his tail. Progress. Emily arrived not long after, Max trotting beside her. "You're here early," she said, setting down a tote bag filled with dog treats and supplies. Ryan shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. Figured I'd come spend some time here." Emily gave him a knowing smile. "You really love it, don't you?" He nodded. "Yeah. Feels like I'm actually making a difference." As they got to work, Ryan noticed a young couple lingering near Cooper's kennel. The woman, a brunette in her late 20s, was kneeling beside the gate, talking softly to him. Cooper's ears were perked up, a good sign. Ryan approached, keeping his voice calm. "He's a special one. Been through a lot, but he's got a good heart." The man looked up. "We're thinking about adopting, but we want to be sure we can handle it." Ryan nodded. "That's smart. Adopting is a big step, but it's also one of the most rewarding things you can do. Cooper just needs someone willing to be patient with him." The woman turned to her husband. "I think we can do it. He reminds me of my old dog growing up." Ryan smiled. "Want to meet him outside the kennel?" They nodded eagerly, and he carefully led Cooper out to the fenced-in meet and greet area. Cooper was hesitant at first, but warmed up as the couple knelt and let him sniff their hands. Soon enough, he was licking their fingers, his tail wagging fully. Ryan watched with quiet satisfaction. Another dog finding his way home. Later that evening, as Ryan relaxed on his couch, Toby curled up beside him. He reflected on how much his life had changed. He had started this journey lost and uncertain, but now he was building something real. Toby stretched, pressing against Ryan's side, as if sensing his thoughts. "You did good today, bud," Ryan murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We both did." And for the first time in a long time, Ryan truly felt at peace with where he was, and where he was headed next. The next morning, Ryan woke to Toby's gentle nudging. It was their new routine. Wake up early, go for a walk, and enjoy the quiet before the world fully stirred. As they strolled through the park, Ryan spotted the couple from the previous day walking Cooper on a leash. The dog looked happier, more confident already. When they saw Ryan, they waved him over. "Hey, Ryan," the woman called. "Look at him. He's doing great." Ryan grinned. "He looks like a different dog already." The man chuckled. "Yeah, I think he knows he's home now." Seeing Cooper so settled made Ryan feel a deep sense of fulfillment. He had helped another dog find a safe and loving home. It was something he wanted to keep doing, over and over again. Emily and Max joined them later that morning for coffee at the outdoor cafe near the park. "So," Emily said, stirring her drink, "I heard Cooper got adopted." Ryan nodded. "Yeah, and he looked so happy this morning." Emily smiled. "You're making a real impact here, you know that?" Ryan took a sip of his coffee and exhaled. "I think I want to do more." "Like what?" Emily asked. "I'm not sure yet," Ryan admitted. "But working at the rescue has been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. I think I want to take it further." Emily's eyes brightened. "You could start fostering." Ryan blinked. "Fostering?" "Yeah. Taking in dogs who need temporary homes before they find their permanent families. It would be perfect for you." Ryan glanced at Toby, who lay contentedly at his feet. The idea stirred something inside him. Could he do it? Could he open his home to dogs who needed care, even if it meant saying goodbye when they got adopted? That night, he did some research. The more he read, the more it made sense. He already had the skills, the patience, and the experience. And if he could give a dog a better chance at finding a family, wasn't that worth it? The next day, Ryan called the rescue center and told them he wanted to foster. The coordinator was thrilled. "We have the perfect dog for you," she said. "She just arrived, and she's going to need some extra care. Can you come by this afternoon?" Ryan didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." Later that day, he met Daisy, a timid Labrador mix with sad eyes and a cautious demeanor. She had been rescued from an overcrowded shelter and needed a calm, reassuring presence. Ryan knelt beside her, offering his hand. Daisy hesitated, then gently sniffed before licking his fingers. "She's going to take time," the coordinator said, "but I think she's in good hands." Ryan nodded, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest. "Let's take her home then." As they walked to his car, Toby trotted beside them, his tail wagging. It was almost as if he understood what was happening, that they were about to welcome another soul in need of love. Ryan glanced down at Daisy. "You're safe now," he murmured. "And we're going to take this one step at a time." With Toby leading the way, they headed home, ready to start a new chapter together. Daisy's adjustment to Ryan's home was slow but steady. The first night, she refused to leave the small dog bed Ryan had placed in the corner of the living room. She curled into a tight ball, watching Toby with wary eyes as he moved around freely. Toby, sensing her nervousness, kept his distance, but would occasionally glance at her, as if reassuring her that she was safe. Ryan sat on the couch, giving her space but keeping an eye on her progress. He had seen dogs like Daisy before, ones who had been let down too many times, unsure if they could trust again. He wasn't going to push her. He'd let her take her time. By the second day, Daisy started to venture out a bit. She followed Toby at a distance, mimicking his behavior as they went outside for a morning walk. She was still hesitant, her movements cautious, but it was a step in the right direction. Emily dropped by later that afternoon, bringing over some extra training treats and supplies. "How's she doing?" Ryan gestured toward Daisy, who was now sitting near the back door, ears perked, but still watching everything carefully. "She's getting there. I think Toby's helping." Emily smiled as she watched the two dogs. "He's a good teacher." Ryan chuckled. "He's got experience. He knows what it's like to start over." Over the next week, Daisy made even more progress. She began eating her food without hesitation, accepting treats from Ryan's hand, and even allowing him to brush her fur. Small victories, but each one mattered. The first time she wagged her tail, just the slightest twitch, Ryan felt something shift. She was beginning to trust. One evening, as Ryan sat on the couch watching TV, Daisy hesitated for a moment before stepping forward and curling up beside Toby. Ryan glanced down, his chest tightening with quiet emotion. "You're safe here, Daisy," he murmured. "And you always will be." The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Daisy was starting to believe she had a place where she belonged. A few weeks later, Daisy's confidence had grown noticeably. She no longer flinched at sudden noises, and she greeted Ryan with a small wag of her tail when he came home from work. She even started initiating play with Toby, pouncing toward him before darting away with a playful glint in her eyes. Toby, ever patient, happily engaged, chasing her around the yard with excited barks. One morning, as Ryan prepared their breakfast, he glanced down and saw Daisy sitting beside him, watching with expectant eyes. He smiled. "You hungry, girl?" he asked, reaching for her bowl. Instead of retreating like she had in the past, Daisy nudged his hand with her nose before sitting back down, waiting. Ryan chuckled. "That's progress." Emily stopped by later that day, noticing the change immediately. "She looks so much more relaxed." Ryan nodded. "She's come a long way. I think she's finally feeling at home." As they talked, Toby and Daisy lay beside each other, their tails wagging lazily as they rested. "Have you thought about keeping her?" Emily asked. Ryan hesitated, looking at Daisy. He had told himself that fostering meant helping a dog transition into their forever home, that it wasn't about forming attachments. But with Daisy, it felt different. She had become part of his routine, part of his world. "I have," he admitted. "I just want to be sure it's the right decision." Emily nodded. "I get it, but I think Daisy's already decided." That night, as Ryan sat on the couch, Daisy climbed up beside him, pressing her head against his leg. He ran a hand through her fur, feeling the warmth of her trust. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe Daisy had already chosen her home. A few days later, the rescue coordinator called to check on Daisy's progress. "She's doing great," Ryan told her. "She's come so far." "That's wonderful to hear," the coordinator said. "We've had a few adoption inquiries about her. Are you ready to start meeting potential adopters?" Ryan felt his stomach tighten. He glanced at Daisy, who was watching him from her spot near the fireplace. "Actually, I think I'd like to keep her." The coordinator laughed softly. "I had a feeling you'd say that." As Ryan filled out the adoption paperwork, he felt a sense of certainty wash over him, He had taken in Daisy to give her a temporary home, but in the process, she had become part of his family. That evening, as he clipped her new tag onto her collar, he smiled. "Welcome home, Daisy." Daisy wagged her tail, pressing against his side as Toby lay beside them, content. Ryan knew then that this was exactly where she was meant to be. The first few days after making Daisy officially part of the family were filled with moments that reaffirmed Ryan's decision. Every small milestone, the way Daisy now trotted confidently beside Toby during walks, how she no longer hesitated before curling up on the couch, or how she even started greeting Emily with an excited tail wag, felt like a victory. One morning, Ryan took Daisy and Toby on a longer hike just outside the city. He wanted to see how she handled a new environment now that she had fully settled in. The moment they stepped onto the wooded trail, Daisy's nose twitched, taking in the crisp scent of pine. She still kept close to Ryan, glancing at him occasionally for reassurance, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Toby, always eager for adventure, bounded ahead, only pausing when he noticed Daisy lagging behind. He trotted back to her, nudging her side playfully, as if encouraging her to explore. Daisy hesitated, then took a few tentative steps forward. When she realized that Ryan and Toby were still by her side, she let out a small, joyful bark and took off in a light sprint. Ryan grinned. "There you go, girl." Emily had joined them for the hike, walking beside Ryan as they admired the view from a clearing. "She's really come into her own," she noted, watching Daisy sniff at a fallen tree branch. "It's hard to believe she's the same scared dog you first brought home." Ryan nodded. "I think she just needed time. And the right people." As they made their way back, the trail dipped down toward a small stream. Toby splashed in immediately, while Daisy stood at the edge, watching curiously. Slowly, she stepped forward, dipping one paw in, then another. She lifted her head, water droplets clinging to her fur, and let out a happy chuff. Ryan chuckled. "Looks like someone likes the water." Daisy turned toward him, tail wagging, and in that moment, Ryan realized just how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. Back home, Daisy's confidence continued to grow. She no longer shrank at sudden noises, and she was even starting to play more with Toby, chasing him around the yard with newfound energy. But the most significant change came one evening when Ryan was finishing up dinner. Daisy, who had once been too timid to even sit beside him, trotted up, sat at his feet, and rested her head on his knee. Ryan stilled, his heart tightening. Slowly, he reached down and ran his fingers through her fur. She let out a deep sigh, completely at ease. Emily, who had been setting down her drink, smiled. "That's trust right there." Ryan nodded. "Yeah, it really is." From that moment on, Daisy never hesitated to seek comfort. She had found her home, her place, and her family. And as Ryan sat there, gently scratching behind her ears, he knew without a doubt that she had healed something inside of him, too. A few weeks later, Ryan decided to take Daisy and Toby to a nearby dog park. He had been hesitant about it before, unsure of how Daisy would react to unfamiliar dogs, but after seeing how much progress she had made, he figured it was time to try. As soon as they arrived, Toby ran off to greet the other dogs, tail wagging wildly. Daisy, on the other hand, stood close to Ryan, observing. He knelt beside her. "It's okay, girl. You can take your time." After a few minutes, a friendly golden retriever approached, sniffing at Daisy. She stiffened for a second, but then, to Ryan's surprise, gave a tentative sniff back. The golden retriever wagged its tail excitedly and playfully bowed, inviting her to run. Daisy hesitated, looking at Ryan. "Go on," he encouraged, giving her an affectionate pat. With that, Daisy took off, chasing after the retriever with increasing confidence. Ryan watched with pride as she ran, her once cautious demeanor now replaced with pure joy. Emily arrived a little later, watching the scene unfold. "Wow, look at her go." Ryan nodded. "I wasn't sure how she'd do, but she's surprising me every day." They spent nearly an hour at the park, letting the dogs burn off energy. When it was time to leave, Daisy walked beside Ryan with a relaxed posture, no longer the anxious dog she had once been. Later that night, Ryan sat on his back porch, watching Daisy and Toby curl up beside each other. The stars above twinkled, and for the first time in a long while, Ryan felt completely at peace. Emily joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "So, do you think you'll foster another dog in the future?" Ryan exhaled, looking at Daisy. "I don't know. Right now, I think my family is exactly where it needs to be." Emily smiled. "That's a good answer." Daisy lifted her head at the sound of their voices, then relaxed, her tail giving a soft thump against the wooden deck. Ryan reached down and gave her a gentle pat. "Yeah, it really is." And in that moment, he knew that no matter what the future held, Daisy, Toby, and the life he had built with them had changed him forever. Ryan woke up the next morning to the sound of Toby and Daisy moving about the house. The soft click of paws against the hardwood floor was familiar now, a sound that had become part of his morning routine. He stretched before getting out of bed, feeling a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there a year ago. He had built something real, a life that wasn't just about getting through each day, but about living each moment fully. As he stepped into the kitchen, Daisy looked up at him with bright eyes, her tail wagging softly. Toby sat beside her, always patient, always steady. Ryan knelt and scratched behind both of their ears. "Morning, guys. Ready for another adventure?" They went on their usual morning walk, but today, Ryan decided to take a different route, heading toward a quieter, wooded path just outside town. The air was crisp, the trees just beginning to show hints of autumn. Daisy walked with confidence now, her stride sure, her head held high. Toby trotted beside her, always the steady guide. Watching them, Ryan felt a deep satisfaction settle in him. When they reached the park, Emily was already there, waiting with Max. She waved as they approached. "Looks like someone's loving the outdoors." Ryan smiled. "She's finally found her place." Emily knelt, rubbing Daisy's back. "She really has. And so have you." They sat on a bench, sipping coffee, while the dogs played in the open field. Ryan exhaled, watching as Daisy chased after Toby, her tail wagging freely. "I never thought I'd end up here," he admitted. "Not just with Daisy, but with everything." Emily nodded. "It's funny how life works, isn't it? One moment everything feels uncertain, and the next you realize you're exactly where you were meant to be." Ryan took a deep breath, letting the morning air fill his lungs. "Yeah, and I wouldn't change a thing." The rest of the day passed in a blur of small, perfect moments. Daisy running beside Toby, the two of them flopping down in the grass, exhausted but happy. Emily laughing at something Ryan said. The golden afternoon sunlight filtering through the trees. It wasn't about big milestones anymore. It was about these moments, the ones that mattered the most. That night, as Ryan sat on his porch with Daisy curled up at his feet and Toby resting beside her, he realized something. He had spent so long searching for a sense of belonging, of meaning. And now, here it was. Not in a grand gesture, not in some life-changing event, but in the quiet, steady presence of the ones he loved. He reached down, scratching Daisy behind the ears. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with trust, with love, with the knowledge that she was home. Ryan smiled. "We made it, girl." Daisy let out a content sigh and rested her head against his leg. And in that moment, Ryan knew. This was home. This was exactly where he was supposed to be. In the following weeks, Ryan continued settling into his new reality. The change was subtle but undeniable. He noticed it in the way he woke up each morning with a sense of purpose, in how he no longer felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Daisy, Toby, and the life he had built with them had grounded him in a way he had never experienced before. One evening, Emily and Max came over for dinner. As they sat outside on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily turned to Ryan with a thoughtful expression. "Have you ever thought about writing all this down?" Ryan blinked. "Writing what down?" "Your journey. Everything with Daisy, with Toby, with the rescue work. Your story could help so many people who are struggling, just like you were." Ryan hesitated, mulling over her words. He had never considered himself much of a writer, but as he looked at Daisy, now curled up peacefully at his feet, he realized Emily had a point. His story wasn't just about finding Daisy. It was about finding himself again. A week later, Ryan sat down with his laptop, staring at the blank document in front of him. He took a deep breath and started typing. "There was a time when I thought I had lost my way. But sometimes, the things we need the most come to us when we least expect them. For me, it came in the form of a German shepherd who refused to leave my side." As he continued writing, the words came easier than he expected. He wrote about the fear, the hesitation, the slow progress, and the moments of quiet triumph. He wrote about Toby's unwavering support and the way Daisy had blossomed into the confident, loving dog she was today. By the time he finished the first few chapters, Ryan leaned back in his chair, exhaling. It wasn't just about telling a story. It was about giving back. About letting others know that healing was possible, even when it felt out of reach. A few months later, after sharing his story with a local animal rescue group, Ryan received an email from a publisher interested in turning his journey into a book. It felt surreal, but as he sat in his living room, surrounded by the quiet comfort of Daisy and Toby, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of emotions as Ryan worked with an editor to fine-tune his manuscript. Late nights were spent revisiting memories, some painful, others joyful, all of them shaping the person he had become. Emily was one of the first people he called when the book was officially scheduled for release. "I can't believe this is happening," he admitted, holding the phone to his ear as he stared at the draft copy in his hands. "Believe it," Emily replied with a smile in her voice. "You earned this." When the book finally hit shelves, Ryan was stunned by the response. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of healing, of the dogs who had saved them, of the unexpected ways life had pushed them forward. The most rewarding moments came when he attended book signings at shelters, meeting people who were now considering adopting because of his words. One afternoon, as he signed a copy for a woman who had recently rescued a German shepherd, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Your story gave me the courage to take the leap." I don't think I would have done it otherwise." Ryan swallowed the lump in his throat and smiled. "You just gave that dog a second chance. That means everything." As the months passed, Ryan realized that his journey with Daisy and Toby had rippled far beyond his own life. The book was more than just a reflection of his past. It was a bridge for others to find hope, to take a chance on something uncertain, to trust that sometimes the right companion finds you when you need them the most. And so, as he sat on his porch one evening, watching Daisy and Toby chase fireflies in the dimming light, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. His life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. But more importantly, he knew now that love, whether in the form of a loyal German shepherd, an old friend, or a newfound purpose, had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. He reached for his notebook, flipping to a fresh page. There was more to write, more to share. Because the journey wasn't over. It never really was. Ryan smiled as he put pen to paper, ready to embrace whatever came next.